Welcome, welcome. Welcome, everyone, to my panelists here and everyone tuning in. I'm Sara Munjack. I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategy and Content for Consciously Unbiased. So we are an organization whose mission is to create more inclusive workplaces. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who is spending their lunch hour with us and just tuning in. This is going to be a really great conversation because today we're hearing from these incredible luminaries about inclusion within the publishing industry. So our panelists have plenty of rich insight and experience to offer. Perhaps we'll learn from each other, and it's just going to be a very important conversation. So the publishing industry, as we know, and I'm just going to keep it really top level here because I want to let the experts here speak on this, has been fertile ground for change in terms of diversity and equity. According to a report from Lee and Low, white workers made up 72.5% of the book business in 2023. So we know there is work to be done, and there is currently work being done, right? Another area of concern that we've heard buzzing about is that folks are very aware of AI. It's in every conversation you're having across every industry. So for publishing, that can have particular implications as well. I know in my circles we've been discussing that preliminary studies have shown that AI technologies can promote bias as well. Another item that's particularly important and relevant to this world are book bans. As book bans sweep the nation, it has its implications on historically underrepresented groups. Now, storytelling is one of our key assets here in diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's so important to empathy, right? And it's so important for exposure to other cultures different from our own. And book bans do a good deal of silencing underrepresented voices. So I also want to just back up here because I came in right with these important and serious notes. But I just want to say in terms of DEI, we know that it addresses business both internally and externally. So it's a very particular type of work, right? And according to McKinsey, I love this fact, companies with a top quartile of racial and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely, I'm going to say it slow so it sinks in, 35% more likely to have financial returns above their respective national industry medians. And that's just in terms of ethnic diversity. So that's not even including gender, education, disability, age, the many more dimensions of diversity that exist. So essentially, we know, and the numbers show, that DEI does drive the bottom line. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. Perhaps we can circle back to some of those points. But for now, we have an amazing group of people here today. So I want to jump right in by having everyone introduce themselves. So go ahead and let everyone know who you are. Maybe say what your connection to the DEI space is and what your connection to the publishing space is. And maybe I'll toss to the order I see on my screen. I see Latoya, you might be the first up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Latoya Rose. I'm the Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Macmillan Publishers. I can pass it on to Lindsey.
Oh, thank you. Hi, I'm Cotter, and I'm the Chief Inclusion Officer at Scholastic, and I've been in this role about 3 years, and I've been with Scholastic 25. I will popcorn to Carrie.
Okay. Sara, thank you so much for hosting us. I'm Carrie Bloxson, she, her pronouns. I have a very long title. I am the SVP of Culture, and I'm the Chief Diversity Officer for Hachette Book Group US and the UK. And I've been here for about 3.5 years. I have a background in both publishing, social justice, marketing, comms, and publicity. I'm going to pass it along to, on my right, Kim.
Hi, everyone. And yes, thank you, Sara. Love being here with all these amazing folks. I am the Executive Vice President for Strategy for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Penguin Random House. I've been here for about 3 years now. And I think am an example of the way that the industry is diversifying, because I am brand new to the industry just those 3 years ago. My only, publishing claim to fame before that was negotiating an 8-book children's book deal between my former company and Random House Children's Books. So just food for thought, right? When we think about the different ways that we can diversify within the industry. And I will pass it to my amazing colleague and teammate, Keline.
Thanks, Kim. I am Keline Adams. Really happy to be here today in this important conversation. I'm the director of DEI at Penguin Random House, and I am so grateful to sit on Kim's team. And I've been at PRH for about 2 years now. And like Kim, also an example of diversifying in the publishing field, because I too am coming with more of the DEI experience to the publishing field, and as opposed to the publishing experience in the publishing field. So excited to have this conversation and be here with all these amazing thought leaders.
Thanks all. I think I had a little bit of the reverse. I came from publishing to DEI.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to everyone. I'm just really excited for this. I want to sort of start really broad. Part of the reason is because the folks that might be tuning in might not know about the publishing industry, might not be in the publishing industry. And we know we do have folks here as well. But let's just start sort of broad, top level. Anybody can hop in here. I wonder if someone can help me define maybe what some of the current key pillars of the focal points for DEI work within the publishing industry are. Perhaps an overview, and we don't have to go into depth, but maybe 1 or 2 points about how DEI work within the publishing space has changed over the years. How has the landscape changed? And then perhaps after that, where do we think it's headed? So a little bit of a timeline question here. Maybe before
I'll
that.
jump in, since I don't have much, experience speaking about the history of it. But the question that I often get when I tell people where I work and what I do is whether, I touch internal as well as external aspects of what happens in terms of book publishing. And so I just want to throw that out there, right, as a way to kind of give context. At least where Keline and I sit, we look at the culture. So, I was actually very serious about doing that first, kind of doing inclusion first, so that then we feel we are positioned to make good on a mission to, create books for everyone. So then we also look at the external facing, right, our partnerships, the content that we're putting out into the world, how we're putting it out into the world. And so our colleagues around the company work with us on all those things. So just a level set, and I'll throw it to someone else who has much deeper knowledge about the industry over time.
Well, I also think it has changed in a way because our customers' expectations have changed. Mm-hmm. And so, the environment is changing in terms of folks want to see themselves, their experience, their communities, their native language reflected in the stories that they are able to see. They want to have access to these. But there's also, the other side where there are people talking about what they believe should be made available and what should not be made available. So I think you're in the middle of this conflict, which you talked about a little bit earlier, around book banning, around stories trying to silence or sort of turn the volume down on availability of certain stories. That's also important. So the work is important because when you think about it from a customer perspective, you also have to think about it from an employee perspective, right? Because they're sitting on both sides, right? They're sitting there and watching you from an internal lens, but also viewing you from an external lens. And then social media has played a huge part in sort of raising and amplifying concerns and opportunities, right? So, it's definitely changing, but I think this work is a journey. So when you actually solve for and really kind of amplify and do the work to address one issue that may come up, another one will pop up. So I think it's going to be very dynamic and always will be. But the way it's changing is really like the increased awareness of the different communities that we serve and how we have to actually step in, represent, make them feel seen and heard.
Yeah. I also think that, especially at Macmillan, one of the things that we talk about is embedding DEI into everything that we do. And so it is in the fabric of the company, and it is important to understand the business of the business, to understand that DEI should be embedded in everything. And so it's not a nice to have, it's not just a people initiative, but it is actually a part of the business. And so how do we really embed it into every single practice? And do we understand how the business plays a role in being more diverse, and how that equates to making sure that the content that we produce is something that's more representative of all of the world? And so I think that's something that we really, really focus on at Macmillan.
I will agree with Latoya and say that it does have to be part of the fabric. And you do that by just normalizing, making it part of everything that we do, that we sell, how we hire, how we retain it, and it becomes part of every conversation. So that it becomes natural and organic in every conversation that we have, in every program that we have. And it is important on both sides, but also, as Lindsey says, we're at that intersection now, right? Because we're making it a part of the fabric of our lives, not just in publishing, but in the world. Now it becomes something that people see as threatening, and now it has to be stopped, right? So we're in the middle of, we've got to make it a part of everything, and we've got to make it a part of everything in here and out there.
I'll piggyback on that too, just to say that, I always say this phrase, DEI in the DNA. But really what it is good business practice.
Yep.
Right? It doesn't even really need a label, because if we drill down to what the underlying notions are, these are things that any, successful business would build their success on. So yeah, absolutely agree that embedding and integration is crucial.
I wonder if we want to do a little bit of prediction here. What do we think DEI work will look like in 10 years from now? And this, I know that's sort of a out there question, but does anyone just have any thoughts on what do you think some of the focal pillars will be, or what do we think it could look like in the future?
Okay, I'll go. I'll try. I'll try. I'm curious if my panel colleagues would agree with this, but I think that many companies, particularly in publishing too, the DE&I roles. This is like the first ever role that a lot of companies have had. So I'm the first DE&I role this company. My company has had Hachette Book Group, for example, and it is a lot, I think, for a lot of D&I leads to say, oh yeah, we've figured out the DE&I strategy. We've got this. We're a couple of years in from 2020, when a lot of these roles had started. And what I think may end up happening, and I'm seeing this, is more of a shift to how do we make sure that we're looking at things in very tangible and data-driven ways. So, for example, representation stats, measuring retention, looking at, percentages of boards or executive teams and the representation there, but actually looking to see how can we use data to make marked change, and where can those changes happen? And I don't mean in terms of quotas, that's a whole different piece. But how do we start measuring the impact that we're making so that we're not arguing about the merits of what it is that we're doing? And I think that the more data focused and the more evidence-based we can be, I think the more people will start to understand why this work is so important and so meaningful. Much in like what so many other, business functions do, is you're really measuring that success by the data. And I think it would be really interesting to see how the DE&I space starts to look at that, I think, more holistically and hopefully even more consistently across not only publishing, because we're all doing things a little bit differently, but just across just the entire methodology and practice of DE&I in and of itself. That's my prediction.
I also think that it's important to, sorry, Keline, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I also think it's important for companies to realize that it's not just one or two, people's jobs for DEI, and that DEI is really right? It's really everyone's responsibility.
Yes.
And I think that the moment that I'm hoping that in 10 years, companies will get that. And so, yes, there can be, folks like my esteemed colleagues here who are leading DEI, but everyone understands that DEI is a part of what their job responsibilities are. And in order to make good products, sales, all of those things, that everyone has to have equal responsibility in it. Keline, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you went first, because at times I was going to say that I totally agree with what both of you are saying. And my hope is that in the next 10 years, in the next 5 years, this will become normalized. Yeah. So it's not even a thought of, how are we going to incorporate DEI practices into our business? It becomes more and more normalized. And so, in the next 10 years, I'm hoping that, these types of conversations about, do we need to hire, more to work on diversity, equity, and inclusion? Do we need to, that it's just a part of the everyday that the data has shown. And it is known that, diversity, equity, and inclusion really does affect the bottom line, which, let's be real, these are businesses. And so at the end of the day, we're in business. And that it becomes, as you say, Kim, a part of the, DNA, the very fabric of how we do business. So.
Yeah, I agree with you. What I was thinking was more like a wish list, but that you don't have to define DEI and that you don't have to wait for an invitation to become part of the conversation. So I would say, I can't say definitively that's where it will be in 10 years, but my wish is that is where we are, that it's no longer something that people feel like they either have to defend or you are in a position where you feel like you have to defend the work, but that it's just part of the ethos, right? And that you don't have to wait to be invited in, but that you are already there in the conversation, which I think will be really important. And then I can't wait to see what the results look like and what we look like as an industry. 5 to 10 years. I really want to see that, with all these other things that come in and influence how the work is done, but really how do we step in and how are we actually creating more opportunity for folks? So.
And I just want to say, if we're going to look at numbers or try to look at numbers in the future, it's really difficult to look at them now because with, everything that's happening around us, we're still, in publishing, you're still looking for support for these books, dollar value, right, for marketing. We're still looking at making sure, why do we have to talk about retention and recruitment, specifically, having different people in it when it's not just happening organically all the time. So if we're looking at numbers and we look at that in 10 years, I'm just hoping at least there's a 50-50, and in 5 to 10 years, like you said, we won't even have to have these conversations. All of us won't have to be in this singular position of defending, honoring, and working, in this, I will almost want to say siloed area, because it is, it's an area that we know and recognize and understand, and we're trying to teach everyone else, how to make this work.
Amanda, I was recently listening to a panel where I heard a DEI practitioner and strategist say, all DEI practitioners are working themselves out of a job, ideally, right? We're sort of eliminating our own role.
We want to.
I mean, and that's really what I was going to say was that my hope for it, in kind of Lindsey's wish list ethos is that it has the same value as every other business function, right? So that it is business critical. So it will have the resources that are needed, and we will be seen as strategists, right? And not siloed into this, this little lane that we call DEI. Instead, because of that integration, we'll just be a part of the business strategy, period.
Yes, period. Moment of silence for that. I'm curious about something. So, Lindsey, you mentioned before the impact of social media, and I kind of want to broaden that out for a second. And how do we think pop culture and media representation affects the publishing world and vice versa? What's the relationship between that?
Well, I can jump in here and talk about how I think publishing affects representation, because that's a key reason why I'm so motivated about my role in this company, in this industry. So in 2020, the New York Times worked with some researchers who discovered that 95% of all fiction published since 1950 have been written by white authors. And by the way, The Atlantic just referenced that same article in another article on the advances of diversity in publishing, and they published that about a week ago. I think they published it on Juneteenth. And it's that 95% metric, because I remember even reading the article, even the Times and the researchers were like, wow, we had no idea there was that much of a discrepancy. So I use that 95% data point as a starting point for the work that I'm here to do, and just for the work that the industry has to do. And so, we all of my colleagues, and I hope I'm speaking for all of us here, we're in the business of stories. And in a sense, we are the cultural gatekeepers of storytelling. And we know that stories make a difference in the lives of readers, young readers in particular, because it provides an opportunity to understand and access perspectives and find insights or commonalities that they may personally relate to that they may not find in their day-to-day. And so when the vast majority of published stories are by white authors, or any singular identity, no shade to white authors, any singular identity, not only does it narrow the range of perspectives and experiences that we're putting out there for readers, but it also reinforces systemic biases in what's considered worthy of publication. If we're all publishing the same thing, that's the thing we know. That's where we're marketing, that's where we're publicizing, that's where we're acquiring. So that's what I think answers the question in terms of how publishing affects representation and the work that we have to do to change that. How do we make sure that we are telling the most diverse amount of stories we can, and also making sure that we're leveling the playing field, or creating a world in which we're opening it up so that everybody of all perspectives and identities gets to tell those stories.
And what we know is that audiences and folks are desperate to just see themselves in everyday scenarios and everyday lives. And so there is a big hole that is in our media landscape of people that just want to see themselves as normal as everyone else, and not an exception to a rule or an exception to a story. And so the other thing, when we're talking about business, this is a good business move to make sure that we are being wholly represented everywhere throughout the industry, throughout the books that we publish, the stories that we're telling. People are desperate to just see themselves in everyday lives.
And also, when we talk about where pop culture sits, publishing is very reactive, and it needs to stop being so reactive and have these stories, before. And as my colleagues know, I think Sarah's heard me. What do I say? Publishing is the harbinger of the culture. I mean, what happens out there really we put books out. It is a reaction to what's happening out there. It happens in pop culture, and then there are a flood of books about those subjects. So pop culture has definitely had a huge impact on publishing more so, in these past few years than they had ever before. And I just wonder if there'll ever be a pop culture classic that will really stand out there, as we have classics that are true and tested through the times.
I think that's a perfect kind of segue, Amanda. I mean, I think we already answered this, but it almost feels like when we say, what does representation mean in the publishing industry? I think that's a perfect answer to that as well, right? On what do we mean when we say representation within the publishing industry?
Well, isn't representation everything? I mean, it's not just ethnicity. It's not just gender. It is, sexuality. It is generations. It is age. It is, weight. There's so many things. It's about abilities, both invisible and visible disabilities. There are so many things. It's about women and men. It just, to be honest, when we talk about diversity, specifically when it came out in 2020, we were talking about ethnicity, and we need to be able to have a very real conversation about that, because sometimes we want to have those conversations and we get caught up in a trap of, oh, it's not just about ethnicity. But it is, a lot of it is, because there are no books about us, by us, for us, that are in the realm of numbers that there are. And at the same time, all those other isms that I just spoke about, there are not a lot of books about those, subjects and characters either. So, diversity is a wealth of things. And while we're not, publishing all of them at the same rate and pace that we may, publish, our Caucasian authors with the new literary, book, or the book that is going to define our culture. We need to make sure that we're defining our culture in various ways. Culture is not one thing; it's many things.
It's true, but I also just want to say, like, thinking about historically, as we think about our own backgrounds, right? We know what we know about our families and our culture and our history and where we came from through storytelling. Storytelling is so critical and important in this moment. And being able to have the right voices and people who have had the lived experience to be able to tell the story is critical. But it's also, when I think about the work that we do, which is really impacting how children see the world and how they learn about the world and each other and themselves. I think back, I am definitely going to go out on a limb here, but I can guarantee that I'm the oldest person on this call. And I grew up where my mother would color in the faces in stories. My mother was a kindergarten teacher, but she would take a brown crayon or whatever, and she would color in so that when she sat down to read the stories to my sister and I, we could see ourselves, right? And how important that is. I didn't realize it at the time. I was sort of like rolling my eyes, but now I see it with my own, having raised my sons and now my grandson, right? Seeing how important that representation is. But that's also how children learn about other cultures and other people and other folks, right? And if we really want to truly start thinking about intersectionality and wanting people to see each other as human and be able to sort of like say, okay, this is where we intersect and this is where we can begin our conversation, because we're not always going to agree. I think the art of storytelling is extremely important, and social media can have an impact on that, because it is what is picked up, it is what is repeated, it is what goes out into the ethos. So I think we have to always, like for me, I always go back to like, how did I learn about this and how did I learn about that from my grandmother or whomever, right? I learned through the art of storytelling because they would tell stories. And I think we have an obligation to honor that legacy by continuing to tell stories in the way that we are doing it within this industry, and to honor that and to try to keep it as real. And then the other part that I will just say is that when you look in children's stories, there's a period of time where the books that were classified as diverse did not have human characters. they referenced animals, food, and things like that. So I think that's also important to note, like what you can have a story that is, around a subject or topic around culture or diversity, but like, what is the story really about, and what is it telling? Is it perpetuating what we already know, or is it actually giving you an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper and learn a little bit more?
I was thinking, when you said the social media piece, I feel like we also have a responsibility kind of in the opposite direction to influence pop culture. When you think about how many books become, something in a media sense, right? Some kind of movie or television show. I think we as a publishing industry should think about that kind of influence that we have. And in this age of social media and other, ability to kind of digitally curate your world, you can create these little slivers, right? Echo chambers. And I think we also have a responsibility there, right? To just broaden that aperture and get people to understand that there's so much variety and so much value in understanding the variety of humans, right? Dimensions of identity that go across the spectrum. And so that's kind of what I think about, being now privileged enough to be in this industry, is how we can shape and influence and hopefully expand what people consume and how they consume it, just from a book, right? Just from the words on the page.
I want to bring it back to something Amanda said just for a second. I believe it was really important and worth kind of bringing back up. We're in the industry where words are so important. Language is one of our biggest power tools in our industry, in your industry, both in DEI though and in publishing, right? When Amanda mentioned sort of on what representation could mean, Amanda used little words, by and for and to, right? But in this case, those words are the most powerful words in that sentence, right? Because it's not just by a certain author, but it could also be for that certain audience, right? And, fill in whichever dimension of diversity that it could be. But I think that is a really wonderful way of looking at it. And I remember when I was first starting my MFA in writing, and I had a professor really challenge me to think about, this piece of writing, who is it for? And that's a whole nother conversation. But I think that that's an important one when we're thinking about who is it by, who is it for, right? And so that's just important to think about as well. So I'm glad that you brought that up. I wonder if we might flip it. Can we flip it to the other direction? So how can publishers effectively engage with and support historically underrepresented contributors? So for those who might not know, when we say contributors, that could mean writers, yes. It could also mean illustrators, could mean authors, kind of expanded out because some of these publishers publish different things. So how can we support, on the other end, not just the audience, but also the contributors?
Well, I think it starts with educating them. I mean, a lot of times people don't know how to even get into publishing, right? And our more diverse audience and writers and contributors, a lot of them don't know how to even get into publishing. And if they try to get into publishing, it tells you need a manuscript, right? And it tells you that you need to have a manuscript that's from an agent, but they don't tell you how to get an agent. No one teaches you that there is that door, right, in between publisher and the writer, the publisher and the illustrator. And I think, it is up to the publishers to help educate those people in that space. And by education, it could just be, look, you don't have an agent, you need an agent, click here, because this is gonna put you in a space where you can look up agents, find out about agents, interact and have conversations and learn. I think part of what we should be doing is educating, because nobody understands how to get into publishing. I mean, if you talk to countless authors that look like us, they will tell you they didn't know if anybody is in publishing, they will say, I don't know how I got into this. I didn't know how to, get my book in the door of any place. And I didn't know how to do it. And somebody told me I needed an agent. I didn't even know what that was. And so I think that education in our industry needs to happen for writers and for illustrators and all contributors to understand, how do I get in this space? Because once they're in there, then they can provide, knowledge, and they can also provide books. They can provide manuscripts, and then we'd be able to have more, more items to publish and look at.
Amanda, but that's why sponsorship and allyship is so important, right?
Yes.
And that's what's we're really talking about, what's missing here. It's about who's willing to put that personal and professional capital on the line to bring someone in, to share with them, to make sure that they understand the ins and outs of the business. And that's what it really, we have to really push that in our companies. Are we willing to look around the table and say, who's not here? Who's not represented? What stories are not represented? And that's one of the things that we really focus on is in a room, everyone's challenged to ask that question. Just for the last minute of a meeting, who was not represented here today? Whose voice have we not heard, right? How do we get some more voices in here so that we can make sure that we're making the best product and selling the best content possible? And I think that that's something that we really need to focus on, because that's where it starts. Keline, I'm going to hand it to you because I think
I don't know. We must be on the same wavelength. I love it. I totally agree that, it's really important to get the commitment to make the pathways in available. The education, absolutely. But, the pathways very clear and available and accessible. And then once authors and other contributors are in, how do we create the space to make sure that they are successful once they're in? So it's getting them in the door and making that commitment to getting them in the door and widening the door and the pathway. And also the commitment to making sure that at every step of the journey, once they are in, they are as successful as possible as any other author or contributor that may come in.
Support every step of the way.
Yeah, Lindsey, my mom didn't color in books, but she colored in cards. So I had a moment there when you were sharing that.
It's nice to know that someone else has had that experience.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Once folks are in, what are the pathways to leadership as well? I mean, if we're going to take a look at historically what leadership has looked like at the top, there isn't as much diversity. And that's not just in publishing, though. That's across every industry. So also, what are the growth paths once folks are actually, okay, great, now we're here. How do we keep them here? And how do we keep them, in a particular growth path that helps us diversify what leadership looks like at the top as well? So I wonder if we can also zoom out another step, and I'm curious about how can publishers leverage their platforms to advocate for social justice and equity issues beyond the literary realm? So how can we even just look at this even more holistically, as DEI practitioners outside of the literary realm? Why are telling certain stories important? And zooming out, how can we speak towards that?
I'll jump in here. Why telling certain stories is important? Well, for me, I think perhaps the most important tool in equalizing justice is knowledge and reading and access to books and stories and perspective. I would argue it's that and probably voting and registering to vote. I think those are the two single most important ways that you can advocate or work toward better social justice. Because when you see yourself in a book, when a young person sees themselves in a book they read, you're promoting well-being, you're opening minds. When you're reading stories about other perspectives, you're creating empathy, you're building understanding, you're erasing ignorance. So, I think I mentioned earlier that I came from a social justice background, but I see this work, which is not a nonprofit, as equally as important, and very much rooted in social justice, in that I'm fighting for access and availability to a diversity in stories in every way that I can.
Yeah, I think it's definitely access, right? Because you can publish and you can create content and materials, but you also have to think about ways in which folks have access to it, especially in this moment, where there's definitely opinions that differ from that, and where people are, even making a choice or making a decision about what folks should be able to read, especially in our industry and children's industry, and when they're introduced to topics, right? What they want. And I respect a parent or an educator's right to determine or have some say in when certain topics are introduced. But, um, you know, ensuring that young people have access is really, really paramount. Because, everyone is not starting at the same point on the starting line. And a lot of that has to do with access. And so I think the flip side of the work that we do in terms of thinking about content is also thinking about access and how do we do that. And I think the partnerships that we can potentially secure is really critical, because sometimes it's not you. Sometimes it's not you out in the middle of Main Street talking about a particular issue, but it's a partnership that you may have with another organization that can help and that you can support, that can help carry the water a little bit further. So I do think, relationships are really, really important, but to Carrie's point, keeping top of mind the reason that you do this work. The reason that you do this work in publishing is around the stories, around access, around trying to help shape culture, right? Because I think in this moment, we have a tremendous opportunity to reshape thinking and to really start getting folks to be able to come from a position not just of opinion, but in a position of fact, a position that's shaped from knowing and understanding your history, understanding the foundation that this country was built on, and understanding the impact of that, and also recognizing that not everyone, when we say get ready, get set, go, not everyone is starting at the same place. I think that's really, really critical and important to this work, whether it's around telling certain stories, but making sure that those stories are out there and that people have the option and the ability to make it available. Just like, children needing to have build their own home libraries. That's so critical to their literary journey, right? And if you don't partner with other organizations to help make sure that happens, that won't happen. So I think we just have to just stay the course and stay true, but also understand what we're really trying to achieve and accomplish.
I mean, I think one more thing that I always think about in terms of social justice is just literacy itself. And I think all of our companies have, to Lindsey's point, partnered with other organizations that focus not even necessarily on, what stories we're putting out into the world, but, giving people access to read those stories. So I know that all of us do that work, and that to me is really, really powerful, right? That we can get behind those kinds of efforts from where we sit, I think is crucial, and certainly, in the social justice realm.
I love that we're also bringing this into the realm of children. And I don't want to digress too much here, but how many times have we heard a parent reading a book with a small child, and the dialogue that can come out of that, right? When reading a book, and Daddy, why does this person look that way, or say that, or do that, right? And so when we look at books and when we look at publishing, it's a vehicle for dialogue. It's a vehicle for conversation. It's a vehicle for inclusion, for bringing in empathy towards exposure, right? From all ages and not just children. I mean, I could bring it into the university, to the round table there. I think, you know, we're having those same conversations. But what was the motivation behind that character? Or why did you choose that particular voicing here? Why did you use that one word? And in poetry, even more nitty gritty. Why is there white space here and enchantment after this line? So those types of conversations is where the gears are turning for so many folks about, oh, well, I had this preconceived bias, right? Bias is definitely something that we well know all about as DEI practitioners, but not everyone realizes that if you have a brain, you have bias, right? Unconscious bias is coded into all of us. So I think when we have books, it allows us to sort of acknowledge what biases we had previously, whether you're a child or whether you're an adult, whether you're a senior, no matter where you are, and understand things from a different point of view as well.
Yep. But it also just like basically it just unlocks this like curiosity. And that's really what you want, whether it's books or magazine, whatever, exposure to different cultures, exposure to your own culture, actually just like, especially for children, just really like sort of ignites the imagination, but also unlocks the curiosity, which is the dialogue that happens between the reader and the child. And that's really, really important, right? That's how people learn. That's how people sort of like try to experience something different, how they experiment, right? Because they're curious about something, they'll ask, right? The biggest part of all of this work is really trying to help people sort of uncover the skill of listening to learn, right? And being able to take in information so that you can start to maybe possibly reimagine or reshape your thinking about a certain topic. So I think everything you said was really important.
Would anyone else like to hop in with any last notes before we wrap up towards the end about the why for them, about either industry? Any last notes here?
I just think that, you know, the why of the industry. I know for me, I didn't even know this industry before I got into the industry. And once I got into the industry, I know that I thought I want to be a publisher because I want to get books into the hands of children and people that look like me. And I want to be able to determine that. When I got into the doors of publishing, I still felt that way, but then it shifted and said, I want to get people like me that look like me in here so that we will reshape publishing and we will be able to have books that represent so many people, and get those into the hands of children. Because again, you know, not just children, but adults, if we don't see ourselves at the top and we don't see ourselves in different, you know, levels and sections of our community, in our leaders, in our workplace, in our schools, we don't know what it looks like. We don't even know how to be it to dream it, right? We don't know what that is. And so publishing, you know, when coming into it, it's so important because if we're not in those places and if we're not there, we can't even affect the change. You know, we are part of, if you are in this business, in publishing or any other business, and in this space, your tentacles are reaching everything, right? Like I said, recruitment, retention, publishing, you're just touching everything because you want to make sure that there's representation of all kinds everywhere, no matter what. And I think that's what we're all trying to do. And we're trying to make sure, you know, we're focusing on 20 things where most people might focus on 2, or maybe 10, but we're really trying to double down and focus on everything because we do want to not have this job in 10 years. We don't want this to be a job that anyone has to have because it has been normalized and it is organic across the board.
think that was so well said. Thank you, Amanda. I'm going to wrap this up with a question that we end all of our conversations with here at Consciously Unbiased. But we all know what a microaggression is. But here at Consciously Unbiased, we use the term micro progression. So that's a small action step towards change that anyone can take to build a more inclusive environment. So this is broad, doesn't have to be within the publishing world, but I would like us to all go around sort of, it could be quick, rapid round. What is just something bite-sized that anyone can do in any capacity to build a more inclusive world?
Okay, I'm going to jump in because I was just in a meeting with a publisher and mentioned and just thanked her for doing this, because this is something she does that I always appreciate. She will, when she's in meetings, and usually this is someone who's not even necessarily on her team. Maybe it's a sales meeting, it's a cross-departmental meeting, or what have you. But every now and then she'll recognize someone who's early career, mid-career, who's just a standout, superstar, doing really well, brilliant. You have so many employees who are along those lines. And will make a point to not only say that, send them an email, but take them out for lunch and just have a conversation and get to know them. And this is someone who's very busy. It's not that there's lots of time in the calendar to do that, but she always makes a point to go find that one person who she recognized, to actually champion them and get a sense to get to know them. And then the one, she always asks the question, what can I do to support you? So kudos to her. And that's my, what's the word again? Not macroaggression, but
Micro progression.
micro progression. Yes.
Thanks, Carrie.
I would say for me, when I thought about this question, it's really about listening. I think that is something that we definitely need to do more of. But I think it's listening, but also recognizing in my mind, and I think this way because, like I said, I have a grandson. He's a year old. And so as I think about this work and what I hope it to be, just really recognizing this profound opportunity we have in this moment to rebuild and shape, each other's thinking, and doing it through speech and actions, and just redefine what it means to be seen as human. I think that for me is like the progression that I think needs to happen. And this for me is the moment. We've been through all of these volatile periods, and we will continue, but this is a moment where we can actually move forward and start to listen to one another a little bit more deeply, listen to speech, be cognizant of our speech. But I think it's a great opportunity that we shouldn't let go. But also, while we're doing this, just remember that there are seeds of kindness, community, joy, and intention sprinkled throughout all of this discord. So I think it's also important to remember that piece, as well as when you're going through the heavy work and the heavy lifting.
Yeah, I will go next, and just offer to folks, because I know, Sara, you had said there are a lot of people in this conversation who are DEI practitioners and doing the work on the daily. So I would just offer to remember to give grace to yourself in this work. And that's something that you can start to do today. This is big, chunky stuff, and it can feel very weary at times. You don't have to solve everything yourself, even within your particular company or business. Give grace to yourself. Recognize when you might need to take a breath and take a pause. That's okay. And create community. Connect with folks who are committed to doing the work, whether it be in your particular company, outside of your particular company. Create community with other folks who are committed to doing the work, for support, for friendship, for laughter, and for accountability. So that would be my micro progression. Yes? Yeah.
You got it.
Keline, we definitely are on the same page today. That's something that I preach all the time about grace.
Yeah.
So some smile so much. I think we need to also ask ourselves the questions. I mean, going along the lines of grace, right? Sometimes we have to communicate to folks that this is hard work. It's not hard work, it's hard work. Yeah. Right? So it's hard work. And so sometimes the best thing you can do is just to listen or just ask a question, right? If someone offends you or if there's a mistake made or something happens, give each other grace and know that we're all in this together. It is about community. It is about making sure that we understand that this is a living, breathing thing. It'll never be over. People just want to feel a sense of belonging. They want to feel like there's something that they belong to and that they're a part of. And so are we making sure that everyone feels included? Something as simple as that. Asking someone, how's your day today? Being willing to have a conversation with someone who's different than you and being willing to learn. I think that's one of the most important things in micro progression.
So my micro progression, something that I do, that I encourage others to do, smile when you see someone, say hello when you see them, and connect them with someone. There are many times, when we were in office, in person every day, and, you just see somebody in the lobby. And it would also be, employees that I know, even when I wasn't in this space, to say, oh, I'm speaking to, 2 or 3 people and say, oh, do you know so-and-so? Oh, so-and-so, let me introduce you. This is, the person from sales. This is, head of production or something or this is, a coordinator in this department. This is our CEO. Maybe you didn't meet them before. Maybe you never had an opportunity, or this is the publisher of whatever, making those connections while they, sometimes may not be a big deal to some, it is tremendous for others. So that's my micro progression. Introduce and connect someone.
And I think my micro progression kind of speaks a little bit to all the amazing things, right, that were put out there that we can just do each day. Because what I was going to say was, make sure you explore some part of the world or some part of humanity every day that you don't already know. But do it with empathy, So whether it's introducing someone to someone else, or, speaking to someone, ask them how they're doing, right? So that you can give them grace, right? All of those things, those little things where you're just delving into something that's not your norm. That's, I think, what will bolster all this work that we do and the discussions that will move our world and our societies forward.
Thank you all. I think that was incredible. I was jotting down notes as we were speaking. I think especially towards the end, there's a ton of takeaway there and something that anyone can participate in regardless of what their capacity is. So I just want to say thank you. That brings us to the end of our hour together. So thank you so much to the panelists for taking time out of your very important days to speak with me and for speaking towards the audience. And thanks to everyone tuning in, and hope to stay in touch. So have a great rest of your week and weekends.
Thank you, Sara, for bringing us together.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day on purpose.
Bye.
Bye-bye.